And this mother goes and she realizes as she thinks and she has all these things that come to her, her child is feeding as well the stress of his mother and the worries of his mother. And finally, and her husband was a merchant. He would go for days, for months, and come back to the house. And she would really take comfort in her husband whenever he comes back. So on one day, her husband came back only to see a smile on her face. And she made sure, even though she was going through this problem that she was, and it's a very, very normal problem, she made sure that their smile was there as soon as her husband came in. Her husband noticed nothing, because first of all, she had no reason in front of her husband, because he was the epitome of manhood, the epitome of manners. Her husband was everything. She wanted her own society within this husband of hers. One day, on one of the trips that her merchant husband was taking, and as she is waiting the time period where he is supposed to come back, she hears a hard knock on her door. Very alarmed, in the middle of the night, she gets up, picks up her baby with her stomach. She opens the door, and as she opens the door, as if a lady is carrying something, and she drops it to the ground, and it breaks. The glass shatters. This woman took a few unwilling steps backwards, and she fell to the ground. The news, the messenger, just gave her the news that her society was just died. That everything she saw, that she smiled for in this world, just died. Her husband had passed away on one of his merchant deals, and they came bearing the bad news to this female. With her, part of her stress over the child, and part of her stress, what happened, everything that was day now became night. The only thing that she had hope in, the only person she had hope in, had died. She lived and she swore and she gave an oath that she will take care of the child. She knew that there was one man in the society. She says, thank God that I have another man and I will produce a man just like that man. His son will be just like him if God was to give me a son, or his daughter will be like him if Allah was to give me a daughter. And this patient woman endured and endured the troubles of life. And she stayed within the society of her own home. It was her husband now, it's her and her own child. And God willing, finally this woman gives a birth to a child. She only hoped that this child had a father, so that when he was born, the first thing he would look at, he would say, Father, Father. Normally the first thing that a child looks for. She had the child, and she nurtured the child, and she took care of the child. Now the child was an orphan from the father's side. She took care of him. At 2 years old, 3 years old, she would tell the child, so he wouldn't be subjected to this society. She told the child that about a society that once lived. She told him about the society of his father. And the child grew with these memories of his father. And he had hope that someday we will have a society like the society of his father, only this time it's going to encompass more than one. It's going to have more than one individual giving to this society. And she always promised this child, as he always asked the mother, when can I go see my father? When can I visit my father? And since the father died on the trip, the grave where they buried him was away. Yet this child was so anxious to finally see his own father's grave. He wants to bring all these traits that his mother told him and apply it at least to something sentimental, even though it may be a grave. And the day came at 6 years old. This mother was very worried about her son, and she decided it is time to fulfill the promise, the oath she gave her son, and she takes a caravan and they head out all the way to arrive at the grave site of her husband, of that child's father. The child was 6 years old. He arrives. When they arrive at the site, they get out of the caravan. She takes her son by the hand. She walks up to the grave and she places the son right next to the grave, as if telling the man beneath the grave, there's another example of you. I'm making sure that I keep this within. This is another example. This is your son. He came to pay you a visit, the son that you never saw. The child turns away after the funeral ceremonies that he did. The child turns away, and the mother realizes a drop of tears on the child's cheeks coming down. She realized that the child has connected with his father beneath the grave, and she takes him. They get back into the caravan, and as they are walking a few miles, the child falls asleep. Just like every 6-year-old child falls on a trip. The only problem here when the child wakes up is when the caravan stopped. The caravan stopped. The child wakes up very troubled. When you wake up, you are very troubled. He wakes up troubled. He looks around, he finds nobody within the caravan. He gets out, and he sees a bunch of people from the caravan gathered, only to be given the news that the reason the caravan stopped because the mother has fallen ill. And the child could not comprehend. He tried to put one and one together, and he thought, this is a familiar territory over here. I don't want to venture into this territory. So all this 6-year-old child could do is just sit back and wait and see what the outcome is. And surely enough, the outcome came that the mother died on the way to this trip. And the child finds himself a day later. The day before he stood on the grave of the father, now he stands on the grave of the mother. He was a paternal orphan. Now he became a maternal orphan. And the child starts drifting the tears over his mother and the tears over his father. But Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala wanted it to be so. So the child, as soon as he wakes up, there's no father. Instead of saying, my father, he says, my Lord. The father is Abdullah, the mother is Amina, and that child is the Holy Prophet Muhammad salawatullahi wa salamuhu alayhi.
Allahumma salli ala Muhammad wa ali Muhammad.
The child grows up with no parents, and he grows up just like mostly every child orphaned with no parents, where thinking and meditation became the greater part of his life. And when Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala came and gave him the message, he would walk around and deliver the message in the order that Allah ordered him to do so. While he's doing that, he would walk around and he would say, people, إِنِّي نَذِيرٌ بَيْنَ يَدَيْ عَذَابٍ شَدِيدٍ. I am a warner telling you about a severe punishment that will come. They wouldn't believe him. His uncle would follow him, and they would say, لا تصدقوا ابن أخي إنه مجنون. Don't believe my nephew. He's crazy. He's not all up there. This Quranic verse came down. قل Muhammad, say to them at this stage one thing. قل إنما أعظكم بواحدة. At this stage you can only comprehend one piece of advice. أن تقوموا لله مثنى, that you may go to Allah in twos and in ones. Go by yourselves. Why? ثم تتفكروا. Then reflect. ما بصاحبكم من جنة. Meaning, as long as there's a head that's saying Muhammad is crazy, what's the Indians going to do? They're going to